first of all, it's a small group, so I'll start with a little anecdote. My book is filled with anecdotes. And by the way, if I refer to my book all the time, I'm not trying to sell it. I'm just trying to tell you what it's about and so on. And after all, I wrote the book that you came to hear me talk about it. So, but there's an anecdote in the book about small crowds. There was a great, and I use the term great, anarchist-syndicalist named Carlo Tresca. I don't know if you ever heard of him. It's pathetic that he wasn't heard of. I could go into a whole story about Carlo, but he was born in the late 19th century, fading nobility in Abruzzo, Italy. Started out as a rebel. Father couldn't stand him, and he socialist. Had to flee the country. Roomed for a while with another young man, a non-socialist named Benito Mussolini. Came to the United States, a rebel to the core. He started organizing among the Italian immigrants who were tremendously exploited, you can imagine, and among the coal miners, Pennsylvania, Lawrence, Massachusetts, the Great Wobbly Strike, you may have heard of it, it's a famous strike. On and on, and he used to battle, he used to battle fascists in the street, pitched battles. He had a group, they'd bust up their meetings and so on, and the fascists were not nice guys, you know. They tried to blow him up. He had scars all over his body. He was an incredible man, Carlo Tresca. And the fascists would have umbrellas, and the tip of the umbrellas would be razors. He'd slash you with it. Wow. And he would fight them. Unbelievable man, Carlo Tresca. So he was organizing among coal miners in western Pennsylvania, and they hired a hall for the coal miners to come, and it was a blizzard starting up. And they had this big drafty hall, the wind blowing outside, and there's 3 or 4 men show up, and that's it. This huge hall, 3 or 4. And very promptly they start to fall asleep and they're snoring. And Carlo's giving his talk, and there's one guy who won't fall asleep. And Carlo says to him in Italian, they're all Italian, he says, "Son of a bitch, let me go home. I'm tired, enough." He said, no, what you have to say is interesting. Talk some more, talk some more. And it went on like this. And finally it was over. The fellow gets up. He says, "You'll hear from me." And he left. And he turned out to be, he says, the best man he ever had. He was a founding member of the Progressive Miners Workers Union, which was an affiliate of the IWW. And he signed up hundreds and hundreds of coal miners in Illinois and western Pennsylvania. And Carlo's moral, it's not the size of your audience that counts, but the quality of those who listen. And that's the point. And those who are interested in your message, that's the point. So I went, excuse me if I went about it, but I had to tell you who Carlo was. To end, he was a great friend of my father. They were really buddies. They went around together. And Carlo was murdered in 1943 by the mafia because he was also an enemy of the mafia. And he was the type of fellow, there was a very powerful publisher in Italian. His name was Generoso Pope. And he published a paper called Il Progresso. It had about 1 million circulation. He was a wealthy man. He was in on everything. And he was a fascist. Mussolini supporter. By the way, Carlo would always send Mussolini a birthday card just to sting him every year. That's the kind of guy he was. So anyway, you know, greetings from Carlo. You know, and anyway, he was a powerful man in Italy. So anyway, what happened is that after the World War II, well, it wasn't the end of the war. It was, but the end was in sight. The Italian community in America had a lot to say about the nature of the Italian government to come, because they were part of Roosevelt's coalition. You know, the urban class, Northeast, the Italians had they were a big vote. So they had a large meeting to discuss the nature of the Italian government. Carlo was invited, many other prominent Italians, and all of a sudden Pope comes in, and he's an anti-fascist. So Carlo was this type of man. He got up and pointed at him, and he said, I'm willing to speak to anyone. You don't have to agree with me. I know that my views are not your views, but not that man. And Pope brought with him a man named Garofalo, who was the right-hand man of Joseph Bonanno, of the Bonanno crime family. And Carlo looks at Pope, and he says, not only is the fascist come here, but he's brought his gangster along. That's the kind of man Carlo was. And he died, he was shot a few months later on 15th Street and 5th Avenue. That was where we had I say we, the radicals had a hall there, and he was shot, Carlo was shot and killed. So this is the kind of people that my father knew. He was one of many. And his story is really the story of 20th century radicalism, extreme radicalism, that is anarchism, wobblies, and so on. And he started out in the radical movement with the Young Socialist League, the YPSLs they call it, the Young People's Socialist League. He was a teenager. From there to the anarchists, he was expelled from the YPSLs because he asked embarrassing questions. They put him on trial. And I have the incident in the book. One of the judges came up to him, they're all lawyers, they're all going to be lawyers, you know. That's what he had against him. Because my father had an 8th grade education, and that's it. He started working at the age of 8. And they came, one of the lawyers on the judge panel, he says, you know, you did a pretty good job considering it, but your case is hopeless. But you acquitted yourself very well. He says, let me give you a tip. You're not a socialist, you're an anarchist. You belong with the crazies. That's what he said. So he said, what's their address? And he went down. And that's how he joined them. And he became an anarchist. So anyway, but his life transcended, I mean, the build-up to World War I, the Red Scare that followed, tremendous repression. It made the McCarthy era look like nothing. I mean, McCarthy era was not nothing, but in comparison to what went on during the Red Scare. The IWW, he loved the IWW till his last breath. He was a wobbly. He just had that thing, something about him, about that organization, the solidarity, the brotherhood. And he also thought it was the only true revolutionary organization ever produced by the United States, within the United States. He didn't know him well, I don't want to exaggerate, but Eugene V. Debs shook his hand as a young man. I'm trying to give you the scope of the man's existence. If you ever looked at the public, they publicized my book, So they took a passage from it and they put it on the net. But I have a part here about how I took him to see the movie Reds. You ever hear the movie Reds?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Warren Beatty.
Warren Beatty, right? It's about John Reed, who was a founder of the American Communist Party, but he wrote a tremendous book called 10 Days That Shook the World, about the Russian Revolution. He was in Russia at the time of the revolution. It's a classic, 10 Days That Shook the World. And he was very, very close with the IWW. He knew Bill Haywood very well and Goldman, all these people. And there was a movie about him, and Warren Beatty played John Reed. The movie was fairly accurate, by the way, from what I gather. And the format of the movie was you had all the characters playing different parts. Jack Nicholson played Eugene O'Neill, who was a big character in the movie, and Diane Keaton. You know, it was a big Hollywood production. It just missed getting the Oscar. It was nominated, didn't quite make it in the early '80s. So I took them to see, but they also had elderly people, real people, in a documentary style, commenting on the various events in the movie. So my father he was old and deaf by then. I took him down to the front, he couldn't hear good, and he had a growling voice like this. And so there's one fellow comes on, old geezer, my father's age, you know, and he says, Henry Miller, what did he know? He was a bohemian in Paris, he was a great writer. And you know, and on, and then some woman, you know. The only one he liked was Roger Baldwin of the American Civil Liberties Union. Anyway, he knew everybody in the movie. That's my point. He knew one of the freaking movie. And he didn't know Reed personally because Reed died before. But he either knew them or he knew people who knew them. We knew their personalities intimately. And they threw us out because he made too much noise, because he couldn't hear good if he talked loud. And so we got out of the parking lot, people spitting at him, you know, this old guy, and he could have walked off the screen, I say, you know, and, you know, played one of the characters. You know, they had a character, Bill Haywood, and Big Bill Haywood, famous Wobbly, and you've all heard of him. Great. In spite of the fact he escaped to Russia, he was a great man in many respects. And so the character doesn't look like Haywood. He says, why didn't they get a guy that looked a little like Haywood? He didn't like that. And then he had a patch, and he says, Haywood never wore an eye patch. Everyone knew that. You know, he had one eye. He says, what you saw is what you got, you know. That's the way he talked, you know, my father. So anyway, I get out, we're in the parking lot, I get in the car, I want to say something to him, you know, he was a cranky old guy. So I said to him, well, how did you like the fellow who played Eugene O'Neill with Jack Nicholson? And I thought he played very well. He says, no good. I says, why? He says, too gloomy. I says, well, you know, O'Neill wrote all these gloomy plays, right? He says, yeah, but he was a good guy to have a drink with. He says he didn't walk around wearing a hair shirt. He had the Irish wit. I says, oh, you had a drink with O'Neill? You know? Yeah, of course I knew O'Neill. So I said, well, why didn't you tell me? You know, he says, why should I tell you? This is my father's attitude. So I said, you know, it was a secret? He says, no, it was not a secret. What the hell difference does it make if I knew Eugene O'Neill? Who cares? See, wasn't that he was trying to be exclusive. He says, who cares if I knew Eugene? What difference does it make? You know? This is the way he was.